Hi, I'm Steve McClure, Cattaraugus County Director of Veteran Services, and this is Our Veterans, Their Stories, preserving our heroes' stories, one story at a time.
My name is Maurice McClure. My service number was 609-4551. I enlisted in the Navy on November the 15th, 1943, because I didn't want to go in the Army and sleep on the ground. I enlisted in Buffalo, was sworn in, transported to Sampson, New York, which is a few miles from Geneva, New York, where there was a very large Navy basic training camp. I went through boot camp for 7 weeks and received all my shots and my basic instructions. After that, I was placed in an electrical school, which I attended for 16 weeks, which is equivalent to a junior college technical course. I was ordered to transport to Oakland, California, where I boarded a ship and proceeded west. On the 4th of July in 1944, we arrived in American Samoa, where they had to unload some equipment in the ship. So part of us were put ashore, and on the 4th of July in 1944, we attended a 4th of July celebration, and the biggest event in this celebration, in my opinion, was a hula dance enacted by a bunch of girls that were probably 14 or 15 years old, just done in shifts in the moonlight. And it told a story about something that I don't remember. I don't remember what the story was, but it was a chance to see island natives do a hula. After 3 or 4 days, we went on, and we arrived in American Samoa, and to discharge some more equipment. And while there, we received a change in destination from Australia to southern New Guinea. Arrived in a reception camp in New Guinea, and it was just a sea of mud. Ships were unloading, and they had every truck that left the ship had to have an armed guard, because there was Japanese trying to steal everything that they could get their hands on. It were hanging around in the jungle, and trying to get uniforms to dress in so they could get into the chow hall to get something to eat. After about a week there, we got transportation, and I went to Hollandia, New Guinea, which is on the northern end. And the MacArthur's headquarters was there at that time, as he had moved from Australia farther up the front. I was there for about a week, and I went to another location halfway down New Guinea, but I didn't know where I was going and what kind of ship I was looking for, or what kind of assignment I had. And then I stayed there for a week and had transportation to Madang, New Guinea, where I found the boat that I was supposed to be on. And it was a 130-foot landing craft with a crew of 10 men and 2 officers. While we were there, Bob Hope appeared and put on a show. I'll tell you, I was in I was in the southern, a couple of weeks before that, I was in the southern part of New Guinea. And I can't remember his name now, but the guy that played the violin.
Jack Benny?
Jack Benny. He was at the base, where the receiving base where I was. So I saw the Jack Benny show with all his girls and so forth. And when I got on the ship, I was only on there a few days, and we saw Bob Hope come stumbling up across the beach with a bunch of girls. You know, the funny thing, he was walking along and somebody was carrying his bags, and these girls are coming behind him, and they got not good shoes on, and they're carrying their own bags and stumbling up the beach. But I didn't go to the show because I had been to the one the week before. And I said, I'll stay on the boat, and the rest of the guys can go to see about it.
What were the shows like?
No, well, just a lot of music and dancing and singing and carrying on. And everybody loved it. Of course, the guys that had been overseas some of the guys when I got there had been overseas for a year. And they were, they'd get a few guys up on the stage to dance with some of the girls. And they had some girls that were just, they weren't the featured ones, but they were just in regular dresses like you'd see girls coming out of high school. And of course that was great neat for the guys, you know. But if you know Ed Moore, do you remember Ed Moore?
Yeah, I remember Ed.
Ed Moore was in he was an airplane mechanic. He was up on, he was a bulletproof fuel tank repairman, was his MOS. But he was up on the island, and who's a girl from Jamestown?
Lucille?
Actress, Lucille Ball. They came there with an act, and she was curious about something. He got to show her through some of the airplanes. That was one of the high points in his life. In a couple, 3 or 4 days, we departed for New Britain, and we spent the rest of that summer and the fall in New Britain, where we accumulated from outposts all along the beach companies of 40th Division troops that were just encamped there to occupy the property and keep the Japanese from being too active. And from there, around the 1st of November in 1944, we proceeded to Manus Island, which was a huge supply base for the Navy. They could supply a complete unit, including buildings, Quonset huts, medical, whatever was needed to establish new naval installations as they proceeded north. And about that time, the Leyte Gulf operation came on, and we spent some time preparing ships to go into dry dock that had been hit in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. We had one of the ships was the USS Canberra, which came in and had been torpedoed and had 35 dead in the engine compartments because they had to shut them off. And they had 900 tons of live ammunition remaining on board, and they wouldn't raise the ship until the ammunition was unloaded. And it took us about 10 days to take that ammunition off because they had to load it with unload it with the hoist that normally lifted a float plane and set it on the rear deck of the Canberra. And in the 1st of December, I was hospitalized with malaria, and I spent my birthday, which is 1st of December, in the hospital. That year is how I remember the date so well. But on about the 14th of December, we were sent to unload a ammunition ship, and we couldn't get our generator started, so they told us to go to the supply dump and order a new, or procure a new one. And we spent the next couple days installing that. And they sent another boat to replace us. And they got off one load, but due to the time lag that it took to assign them to the project, and they didn't get to the ship to take off ammunition until late in the afternoon. So it was evening before they got off, and they proceeded to the ammunition dump, but the surf was high and they had a hard time getting on the beach. So by the time they got off the beach, it was after 10, 11 o'clock at night, so they just anchored. And the following morning, we were installing a replacement generator on our ship, and I was working in the engine with my helper, and I thought we got rammed. There was a terrific vibration, a big thump, and we ran up, and everybody was looking off to the northwest or the northeast, and there was a huge mushroom cloud, and as we watched, there was parts of the ship starting to come down out of the clouds, and there was pieces of ship bigger than houses coming down, and that ammunition ship had exploded. It was I can't say the name of it now, but it had exploded, but our sister ship that had been assigned to go out there was on her way out, and when it exploded, they just tied up on the beach. But it was the Mount Hood was the name of the ship that blew up, and we worked there for a while, and about the first of the year, we were towed up to the Philippines, and we worked in the Leyte Gulf for the rest of the year, and we had the boat had been replaced by a later model, which came out about the time I went overseas. So on the later actual invasions, they were using the newer model boats. So we had one of the duties we had to make a tour of the Leyte Gulf and drop off whatever supplies and so forth were needed at all the naval installations around the ship. And later in the summer, we started getting shiploads after shipload. Sometimes 15 ships a day would come into the harbor loaded with surplus goods, supplies, or armament, vehicles, and so forth from the European campaign. And this equipment was all unloaded and reshuffled, and some of it reloaded, and we started reloading for the Japanese invasion. And they loaded all kinds of non-perishables, ship after ship, all summer for the invasion of Japan. And a lot of the ships, later, they had a crane called a Marianne. It was mounted on a barge. It was probably, I would say, 60 or 80 feet square. It was a pontoon barge where these pontoons were all fastened together. There was a railroad track, a circular track, railroad track on there. The crane was set on this track, and it could hoist a tank out of a ship and set it on us. A Sherman. And it was that tall, and they used that for a lot of heavy things. Like when they would unload ammunition, the large projectiles for the battleships, which weighed about 1,500 pounds apiece, and they came in batches of 5 or 6, and they were all fastened together, and they had rings in the top of them in place of the the thing that discharged them. There was a hole in the front of the projectile, and there was a lift ring screwed in each one of them. And when they put the fuse in, when they took that ring out and put the fuse in before they fired the missile. And the fuse could be a contact or proximity. And they had several different ways of detonating the projectiles. But these things were very, very heavy. And the powder was in garbage can-like containers. And they loaded this stuff off on us, and then we went ashore, and they came and picked it up with cranes and unloaded it. That was the main way of loading us. But normally a ship would unload with their own cranes with jibs.
The warehouses had to be amazing.
Pardon?
The warehouses. The amount of storage space that you had on that island had to have been huge.
It was unimaginable. When 5 or 6 aircraft carriers and maybe a couple battleships or a couple cruisers come in and they want groceries. And they had small towns with streets that had maybe 6 or 8 freezers on each side of a square with a power plant mounted at the end. And this was like a town. You could drive through it. And that was just for frozen food. Now, we never got frozen food. We would get an allotment of 40 pounds of steak, 40 pounds of roasts, 40 pounds of stew meat, and a whole lamb carcass, and a half a case, maybe 30 dozen of eggs for 10 men. And we had either a 4 or a 6 cubic foot refrigerator, like you would have in your house in the 1930s, to store this stuff in. Now we would generally, if we were near a base, we would generally take a bag of eggs, maybe 4 or 5 dozen eggs, and proceed to find a bakery. And we would trade the eggs for bread. And we would go back and we would gorge on meat, fresh bread, eggs for 4 or 5 days. And when the blood started to run out of the bottom of the refrigerator onto the floor, we would take the meat out of the refrigerator and throw it in the ocean. And the meat would generally last about 4 days. And after that, we were on canned stuff. We had a cook that was assigned to this ship at the onset, and he was really a terrific cook. He wasn't the cleanest man in the crew. As a matter of fact, he was probably at the end. But he could cook. He could make pancakes that were half an inch thick and crisp. And he could do wonders with powdered potatoes, which a lot of cooks couldn't do. But he cooked all the meals, and generally somebody would help him with dishes and so forth. But he had no running water and no hot water. It was just a pitcher pump sitting on the edge of a sink, and he had about a 3 or 4 foot square stove that was fired by diesel oil. And needless to say, it wasn't very clean, the galley. It was almost impossible. Between the rotten food running out of the refrigerator and the diesel oil seeping out of the stove, it wasn't the cleanest place in the world. But he did a good job. To tell you the truth, this was a ragtag outfit. We wandered around the jungle and did these odds and ends jobs that somebody had to do. And the men were nothing in particular. I think that possibly I was the only member from a Class A school. And how I got assigned to the thing, I have no idea. But And the officers, when you assign an officer to a ragtag boat with 9 men, and you're going to have an officer and an executive officer, right? So they don't exactly come from the top of the class. I mean, these are leftover people. We had officers that would, in an emergency, they just weren't there. Not any fault of their own, but they were just poor selections to start with. When you get officers, when you induce people in the service, at the time the conditions were at the way they were in the middle of the war, your pickings get pretty thin. I mean, you're picking a lot of people at the very end that you wish you didn't have for any situation. And it was the same way with the officers training school. There's a lot of people come out of college that don't acquire a whole hell of a lot of common sense. So you get a lot of those people, and they don't go up the line very fast. And when they assign people to these small assignments, like small groups like this, they don't get very good picking.
How long did the officers stay with you? Did they turn over quickly, or were you stuck with the same ones for the entire time?
No, I think we had 4 commanding officers, and some of them would they were ensigns mostly, but they would proceed to second lieutenant a lot of times, and the normal officer was a second lieutenant and an ensign for a I can't say it.
Executive officer?
Yeah, executive officer.
Yeah.
Second in command.
Right.
But they all worked out, and most generally, most of the people that came on board were just out of boot camp. They were recruits. And but occasionally you would have some older men. But during the end of the war, we were getting men in 35 years old, and some of them had worked in places and had practical experience in how to tie a knot or how to do something, and they picked it up faster.
Right.
And a lot of times the 17-year-old just stumbled around for a while, got up pretty fast, but we didn't have any. We didn't get very many. I had gone to Class A school, and when I got out of school, I was 13th in the class of 120, and the first 12 were received a third class rating, and the rest of us went as first class strikers, but due to the situation, I lost my rating getting out of school, and so I don't know exactly how I got assigned to this boat, but I did, and because the crews were mostly untrained people.
How many boats were there of you? So how many boats did you guys were feeding these ships? How many of them were there?
Oh, I have no idea. We had a group commander, and he was our flagship was a commandeered fishing boat, and he had command of I don't know how many boats, maybe 12 or 15. They didn't make it. There wasn't a lot of these boats. The boat I was on was a Model 5, and they were the first ones that were built. And then they went to the Model 6, and the Model 5 did the first landings in in the Pacific. As a matter of fact, they had some in Africa, and they had some in Southern Europe. Now, I don't know how many they had in the European invasion, but the European invasion was so huge that they say that there was 5,000 boats standing out there the morning they invaded. Now, my brother-in-law parachuted into that area the night before, and he was standing in a river all night because the plane got on fire, and they discharged the paratroopers to make the plane lighter and try to get back to Europe, and they were supposed to land on a highway, but when they landed in it, it was a river, and a lot of guys drowned. And that was the same area where the guy ended up hanging on the church steeple by his parachute, and not far from there. But they couldn't get out of the river because they said every time they moved in the night, there was people fired at them. So, there was our boats. This boat, the highest numbers I ever saw was around 300 on the boat. And then they come out with the Model 6, and they were up around 2,000 boats.
An army travels on its stomach, but we never really thought about what goes into getting
The
food
base
to 'em.
was the base at Manus. I was in the fleet hospital there. Now, you gotta realize there was no helicopters. We saw one helicopter after the war was over, but there was no helicopters. We had high-speed boats. They were called ARS, Air Rescue. Now, they were PT boats with no armament, and they were based in different places around airports. And when a plane went down, these guys could go, if the sea was reasonable, they could go 80 miles an hour. And they would just go out and try to pick up survivors. And if there was anybody injured, we'll say on New Britain, it was serious. There would generally, in New Britain, there wouldn't be any of those boats, probably, because the aircraft activity wasn't that heavy. But the only way to get them back was on a boat. And on the larger invasions, the big white ships would come in, and there would be a hospital ship standing off. Whenever we saw a hospital ship, it was a pretty good sign there was something going to happen.
Something going down.
But the only women we saw for the first year I was overseas were nurses standing on the big white ships.
Did you ever offload soldiers to your base hospitals on your boats?
We had a tarp that would cover the whole deck. It was probably 60, 80 feet long and 35 feet wide, and they had a cable that would go up and ridge this up, and we could hold probably 150 stretchers. But the only people that we transported we never transported any on our boat, but the boats like ours that were equipped this way, they would transport people that were going back to a hospital, but they weren't critical. They would be people with you got a lot of people. Most of the people, that get injured in a battle have got a broken leg or a broken arm or a strained shoulder or a crooked neck or they got cut and they're bandaged up. But they can ride for a couple days. So they would put them on there and put a couple corpsmen on with them, and they would take them back to a hospital. But the Navy, when the Navy gets into a battle, if a big ship gets a conflict, and these guys are standing 10 miles apart, bombarding each other, and they get hit, you might have 100 casualties in 5 minutes, or in a minute, because it's not an individual shooting at somebody. They're shooting these big things. So their base hospital, like the base hospital on Manus, was big, because they were servicing an area that was probably 1,500 miles square.
How many people, if just a ballpark, how many were you, including everybody in the base?
In the area?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, maybe 3 million. At the end of the war, we were occupying islands all the way from Australia to Japan. I was amazed because I had a cousin that graduated from college in about high school about 1935, and he went to Tri-State Engineering in Angola, Indiana. And he graduated, I don't know, what was it, 2-year college or something, but he graduated with a pilot's license and a degree in aeronautical engineering. Needless to say, he enlisted as a pilot, but he disappeared. He'd go here, he'd go there. He never showed up, never left the country. And all of a sudden, he was on Tinian. Tinian was where they dropped the atomic bomb from. And they blew the 29s from there. If you get a picture, if you look on the web and you get a picture, there is B-29s parked like it's a Super Bowl. You know, the pool looks like a Super Bowl parking lot, but it's big. And these planes are big. I know this Ed Moore was at the place, and he said, for some reason or other, one of them landed at their place one day, and he said they couldn't believe it was an airplane. It was that big, you know, compared to what they'd been seeing. And but he was the B-29 had 3 pilots. It had a pilot, a co-pilot, and an aircraft commander. And he was an aircraft commander on one of these things, and he'd been following this program around the United States apparently for 3 or 4 years. And that's why he never left the country. He had a wife, and eventually he had a daughter that was traveling around with him. They would be. Well, I went to the West Coast in June of '44, and I heard that he was in Liberal, Kansas. I don't know where he was, but he was near Liberal, Kansas. I got into Liberal, Kansas, and we had a train stop there to be serviced, and I tried to call out there, and they said, this is a closed base. Nobody can call here unless they got the right numbers, you know. And then I went overseas, and I was overseas for a few years, and I heard he was on Tinian. So occasionally when you're in the service, if you wanna, you can get a flight if you got the right connections. And I thought he was up on Tinian, and I thought, I'd like to see. I was only, I don't know, 1,000 miles from there or something, not far. And so I checked around, and they said, nah, we can't land on Tinian. Our planes can't land on Tinian unless it's a dire emergency. It was a great experience, and it was a privilege. It was a privilege to serve. I always considered it that way. And everybody had to do some job. Sometimes we never fired. Occasionally, when Charlie would come over in the afternoon, and he would scout around and try to drop a few bombs on where they told him, and we would shoot at them. But they never bothered us because we were too small to bother with. We weren't going to affect the outcome of the war one way or the other. But they tried to blow holes in the airports and damage the airplanes and so forth. And at night they would quite often shoot at the movie screen, and everybody would scatter. And
So there were gorillas on your island?
Not that we ever encountered, but they were around stealing things, and they knew they couldn't be very effective, and some of them had no weapons. So they a lot of times in an invasion or in an action, so a certain amount of people just run off. They just run and hide in the jungle, and because they're afraid of getting killed. And some of them were there for 15, 20 years after the war. Still some, and in the Philippines especially, it wouldn't have been a bad place to stay because they were halfway civilized, And there was a tremendous opportunity for anybody to stay there. If anybody would have stayed there and educated some of the people in the way that we do things in the United States, as far as agriculture and so forth, there was tomato plants growing there as tall as that cabinet, but they had tomatoes on them about this big around because they weren't cultivated or fertilized or anything. They just didn't have the knowledge to go ahead and do things, But so I assume that they've improved a lot, Of course, worldwide, the guys grow in and they grow vast quantities of all kinds of produce. The war ended, and we had a massive incendiary demonstration for about an hour and a half, which every ship in the harbor lit up with everything they could fire that had incendiary projectiles. And soon after that, the crews started to disappear. They took them off, and they just went home. And eventually, in the first part of January, the last part of December, I guess, everybody was gone but myself and one helper, and we were assigned to cut holes in the ship in various places in the deck and disable all the fired guns. The mounted anti-aircraft guns all the gears had to be cut. And I left the boat and got on another ship of the same style for a few days. And the day after I left, I saw the boat being towed by a fire tug, about to be sunk. And in January, I came back to the United States and had a month's leave and was told to report to New York City. So I reported down to one of the piers in New York City, which was a holding area for people waiting to be reassigned, and I stayed there for 2 or 3 weeks and attended a lot of shows in New York City because they were available at the Coca-Cola canteen on Times Square. You could pick up tickets for a lot of the theaters, and they were all complimentary. And I was transported to Norfolk, Virginia, and boarded the USS George K. McKenzie, which is a brand new destroyer that had only been in active duty for about 5 or 6 months. And we proceeded, on Monday mornings, we proceeded to New Jersey and stood off while men from Annapolis came out in cruisers and learned to fire the large guns. We tracked fire for them every day during the week. And on Friday morning we went back to Norfolk and spent the weekend and then proceeded. In the latter part of May, we had some family problems, and I had been extended. My original enlistment was for the period of the war in 6 months. But the Navy didn't pay too much attention to that, and they said the electricians were in short supply, so we were reassigned. And but due to the family problems, the Red Cross got me discharged. And I had the opportunity to get my own ship as the chief electrician, an active chief. And in 6 months, if I could pass the leadership test, I would be a chief. And but I was engaged and wanted to get married, and I was 20 years old, so I went home.
How was the celebration when you got back into the country? Did you wear that uniform? With
We
pride?
got a good reception, but that was about it. I was, like I said, all the group left, all the officers, all the men on the boat left, but me and another guy. And we had to take care of getting the ship ready to sink. And then I was sent to another ship, and I was there for 4 or 5 days, and then I got individual orders, and I got on this aircraft. It was a converted tanker of some kind that had been converted into an aircraft carrier. They had about 2,000 guys all sleeping in the hangar deck. They had put up steel things, and they just had canvas. I don't know. They have these raw oblong-shaped steel frames with a fabric stretched between them to use for a mattress or to sleep on, you know. And they just had put these things in these racks, and we were five high, sleeping. And we got to one place. We were inside of one island. I can't remember the name of the island now. We were inside of this island. Anyway, we got diverted, and because there was a flying boat went down in the water 100 miles away. So we got to this thing in the afternoon, and it was one of those Goonie birds that they had where the boat hung down from the wings. I can't remember the name of them now. There was a million of them. But anyway, these guys had been going back to the States with this thing, and they went down, and they fooled around there all night, and they couldn't get it to sink. And so finally they were breaking out some stern guns, and they were going to shoot it. But about the time they got the covers off the guns, it sank. But the guys had thrown everything overboard. They radioed whoever and got a hold of somebody. They told them, but then after that they threw everything over. The radios, their personal bags, and everything went overboard. And we picked them up off this thing, and we went to Hawaii for fuel. They left them up in Hawaii, and I always told everybody, I think those guys are still there looking for their records. you know how things disappear. Oh, yeah. And but I thought, boy, here are these guys standing there with no records, nothing. And they're going to try to get transportation back to the States and get discharged, you know. And
If you got me stranded, Hawaii's not a bad place, though.
Oh no, I know it, but we just laughed about it. We took off and came back to the States. Well, yeah, when we got to San Diego, we went into San Diego, and when you come around the point in San Diego, the bay kind of curves in like that. Well, when we came around that point, there was fireboats there. And they escorted us in with the water squirting all in the air. And when we got around a little bit, there was a sign on the side of the mountain. Letters were at least as high as that wall, and it said, "Welcome home," in great big letters. And when we got up to the dock, there was a band there, and the Red Cross was there. And they had these pom-pom girls there were doing a jig on the on the beach, and it was funny because, of course, everybody runs over to that side of the ship to see. Well, the ship is going over like this. There's a big ass aircraft carrier, you know, and the guy's trying to tie it up, and he's screaming on the deck, "Disperse on the deck, please disperse on the deck." And I was down on the fantail, and they had tied this thing up, and it had hawsers like yay big, you know, like 10 of them going to the dock and back, and that started to straighten up, and the water was squirting out of these things, just squirting out of them lines every place and pieces of. Well, that hawser that big that they use has got steel wire in it. And this thing was popping and snapping, and they were trying to loosen it off to keep up with the ship coming back up. It was a three-ring circus. But yeah, that was the extent of our welcome. We marched off. You know, I left that boat, and I had a Navy 45 automatic that I had procured through devious means, and we had 2 or 3 of them in the officers' quarters. There was a gun rack. Officers had bunks over in a corner, and then there was kind of a desk, and then there was a ammunition rack when you came out, and there was 2 or 3 Enfields from World War I, I guess, British 38 caliber, and we had 4 or 5 Grands, and 3 or 4 carbines, 30 caliber carbines. And I gotta put one of them in my sea bag, you know? But I was afraid to. I didn't left the 45s there, I left everything there.
Or VA loan?
In 1950, I got a GI loan to buy a new house. And that was about the extent of my, well, I did do a apprenticeship in a plant that was similar to the Luminite in Salamanca in the drawing room, like 5 years. But I believe that was a state finance thing. But they said it was subsidized. It was paid for mainly by government money.